They considered mankind a forgotten legend, until we took the field. The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly had not been this full in over 300 years. Representatives from nearly every known species in the galaxy had gathered on Prime, the ancient world that served as the political heart of their alliance. The hall itself was a marvel of engineering, a dome of living crystal that stretched half a mile across, its walls shifting colors to reflect the emotional state of those inside. Right now, it glowed a deep, worried purple. Ambassador Al stood at the central podium, his massive form casting long shadows across the polished floor. He was a species known for their size and their scales that changed color with their moods. His scales were currently a dull gray, the color of fear and exhaustion. His four eyes swept across the assembled delegates, seeing the same emotions reflected back at him from 100 different faces. "Fellow members of the Assembly," he began, his voice amplified by the hall's ancient sound system. "I will not waste your time with pleasantries or political speeches. We are facing extinction." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others simply stared straight ahead, having already accepted what Al was saying. "The Dominion fleet has broken through our outer defenses," Al continued. "They have conquered 17 systems in the last rotation alone. Our combined military forces have been reduced to less than 40% of their original strength. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the core worlds within 40 standard rotations." A delegate from the collective raised one of its many tentacles. "What of the reinforcements from the outer rim colonies?" "Destroyed," Al said flatly. "The Dominion intercepted them 3 days ago. There were no survivors." The hall fell silent. The delegate slowly lowered its tentacle, its bioluminescent skin flickering with distress. "I have called this emergency session," Al said, "because we have exhausted all conventional options. Our fleets cannot match the Dominion's firepower. Our technology cannot penetrate their shields. Our soldiers, brave as they are, cannot stand against their warriors in ground combat." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the assembly. "If we do not find a new solution, we will all be dead or enslaved within the year." The silence stretched on. No one had any suggestions because there were no suggestions to make. They had tried everything. They had formed alliances with species they had been feuding with for centuries. They had pooled their resources, shared their technology, and thrown everything they had at the Dominion. It had not been enough. High Counselor Myers of the rose slowly from her seat. She was ancient, even by the standards of her long-lived species. Her skin had faded from the vibrant blue of youth to a pale silver, and her movements were careful and deliberate. But her eyes, large and luminous, still held a sharp intelligence that had guided the assembly through countless crises. "There is one option we have not discussed," she said, her voice soft but carrying easily through the hall. Al turned to face her, his scales shifting to a curious orange. "Counselor, if you know of any resource we have not yet employed, I beg you to share it." Myers was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a strange quality, almost dreamlike. "When I was young, barely past my first century, I witnessed something that has stayed with me my entire life. I watched a fleet of ships unlike any I had ever seen emerge from the darkness between stars. I watched them fight alongside our ancestors against an enemy that seemed unstoppable, and I watched them win." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some delegates looked confused, others looked skeptical. A few, the oldest among them, looked suddenly hopeful. "I am speaking," Myers continued, "of the humans." The reaction was immediate. Some delegates laughed, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few seemed genuinely offended. "The humans are a myth," declared Ambassador of the Dominion, "a species known for their logical minds and their dismissal of anything that could not be proven with data. They are a story told to children, a legend invented to explain the unexplainable victories of our ancient past. There is no scientific evidence that they ever existed." I am the evidence, Myra said calmly. I saw them with my own eyes. I spoke with their commander, a woman named Price. I watched her ships tear through enemy lines like they were made of paper, and I was there when they left 1,000 years ago, after the war was won. The hall erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other, some demanding proof, others dismissing the entire conversation as a waste of time. Al had to activate the emergency sound dampeners to restore order. "Counselor," he said carefully, once the noise had died down, "even if what you say is true, the humans left 1,000 years ago. They returned to there, a place so remote that even our most advanced sensors cannot locate it. For all we know, they destroyed themselves centuries ago, as many aggressive species do." Myra smiled, a rare expression for her kind. "You do not know humans, Ambassador. In all my years, in all the species I have encountered, I have never met a people more stubborn, more resilient, or more loyal. When they left, their commander made me a promise. She said that if we ever truly needed them, they would return. A promise made 1,000 years ago by someone who is certainly dead," said dismissively. "A promise," Myers countered, "that was repeated by every human I ever spoke with. It was not just a personal vow. It was something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of their culture. They considered it a sacred duty." Al's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. "Even if we believed you, Counselor, how would we contact them? We do not know where their world is. We have no means of reaching them." Myra's reached into her robes and a small device, ancient and covered in dust. "Before they left, they gave us this. They called it a beacon. They said that if we ever activated it, they would hear and they would come." The hall fell silent once more. Every eye was fixed on the small device in Myra's hand. "Why have you never mentioned this before?" Al asked. "Because we never needed to. After the humans helped us win the first Shadow War, we enjoyed 1,000 years of relative peace. The beacon was placed in the historical archives and forgotten. I only remembered it when I heard of the Dominion's advance and realized that history was repeating itself." Al looked around the hall, seeing the mixture of hope and skepticism on the faces of his fellow delegates. "And you believe that if we activate this beacon, the humans will actually come?" Myers met his gaze steadily. "I believe that they will try. Whether they succeed depends on factors beyond our control. But I know this much. If there is even a small chance that the legends are true, we must take it. Because right now, we have nothing else." The vote was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. By a margin of 63%, the Galactic Assembly authorized the activation of the ancient beacon. The device was brought to the central communications array on Prime, and with trembling hands, Myers pressed the activation switch. The beacon hummed to life, emitting a signal that traveled faster than light, crossing the vast distances between stars in mere moments. The signal carried a simple message, recorded in the old human language that Myers had learned in her youth. "To the people of Earth," the message said, "we are the Galactic Assembly. 1,000 years ago you fought alongside us against the darkness. When you left, you made us a promise. We are calling in that promise now. We are dying. We need your help. Please, if you can hear this, come back to us." The message repeated over and over, broadcasting into the void. And across the galaxy, the Assembly waited, hopping against hope that someone was listening. The signal reached Earth 3 days later. Commander Cole was in his quarters aboard the carrier Endurance when his communicator buzzed. He had been trying to sleep, a rare luxury in his line of work, and he groaned as he reached for the device. "This better be important," he muttered. "Sir, you need to come to the bridge immediately." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Marshall, his communications officer. She was young, barely 30, but she had earned her position through skill and dedication. She was not the type to call him in the middle of the night for trivial matters. Was on his feet and pulling on his uniform before she finished speaking. "What's the situation?" "We've received a transmission, sir, on the old Coalition frequency." Froze, his jacket half-zipped. The old Coalition frequency had been decommissioned before he was born, before his father was born, before his grandfather was born. It was a relic from the time before the isolation, when humanity had walked among the stars alongside other species. "I'm on my way." The bridge of the Endurance was a study in controlled chaos when arrived. Officers were rushing between stations, checking and rechecking data, their faces a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Was waiting for him at the main console, her blue eyes wide with an emotion could not quite identify. "Play it," he said without preamble. She nodded and activated the recording. The voice that filled the bridge was strange, clearly not human, but the translator built into the system converted it to English in real time. "To the people of Earth, we are the Galactic Assembly. 1,000 years ago you fought alongside us against the darkness. When you left, you made us a promise. We are calling in that promise now. We are dying. We need your help. Please, if you can hear this, come back to us." The message repeated twice more before signaled for to stop the playback. The bridge was silent, every officer staring at him, waiting for his reaction. Cole was not an emotional man. 30 years in the fleet had taught him to keep his feelings under control, to make decisions based on logic and strategy rather than sentiment. But as he listened to that message, he felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. His grandfather had been a historian, one of the few who still studied the time before the isolation. He had filled Young's head with stories of the old days, when humanity had sailed the stars alongside beings from other worlds. Stories of great battles and noble sacrifices. Stories of a promise that had been made and never forgotten, even after 1,000 years. Had always thought they were just stories. "Sir," his voice broke through his thoughts, "what do we do?" Took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. "Get me Admiral Price, Priority 1, and wake up the rest of the senior staff. We have a decision to make." Admiral Price was not happy about being woken up at 3 in the morning, but her annoyance faded quickly when she heard the recording. Within an hour, she had called an emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council, the body that oversaw all military operations in human space. Found himself standing before a room full of admirals, generals, and political advisors, explaining a situation that he still half believed was a dream. "The transmission is genuine," he said, pointing to the data on the holographic display. "Our analysts have confirmed that it matches the old Coalition protocols exactly. Whoever sent this message had access to codes that have been classified for over 900 years." General, the commander of the ground forces, leaned forward in his chair. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, and with a permanent scowl that had earned him the nickname Stone Face among his troops. "So some alien species managed to dig up an old code book. That doesn't prove anything." "With respect, General, the codes are not the only evidence." Changed the display, showing a star chart. "The transmission originated from a system called Prime, which matches our historical records of the Assembly's capital. The language used, once translated, contains specific references to events that only someone who was actually there could know." "Events that happened 1,000 years ago," countered. "For all we know, this is a trap. Someone found our old records and is using them to lure us out of hiding." "To what end?" Admiral Price asked. She had been silent until now, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the presentation. "We've been isolated for a millennium. No one even knows we're here. Why would anyone go to such elaborate lengths to trap a species they don't believe exists?" Had no answer to that. Dr. Torres, the head of the Historical Research Division, spoke up from her seat near the back of the room. She was a small woman with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, but her voice carried an authority that made people listen. "I've been studying the transmission as well, and I believe it's authentic. The references to the First Shadow War match our records exactly. Whoever sent this message knows things that could only come from direct experience or from records that were never shared with outsiders. So the assembly is real, Price said slowly, and they're asking for our help. More than asking, said. They're begging. Based on the tactical data included in the transmission, they're facing an enemy called the Dominion that has already conquered most of their territory. They estimate they have less than 40 days before the core worlds fall. The room erupted into heated debate. Some officers argued for immediate intervention, citing the ancient promise and the moral obligation to help those in need. Others urged caution, pointing out that humanity had spent 1,000 years building their strength in isolation, and that throwing it away on a war they knew nothing about would be foolish. Listened to the arguments, but his mind was already made up. He had spent his entire career defending humanity against threats from within their borders, pirates and rebels, and the occasional rogue colony. He had never had the chance to fight for something bigger, something that mattered beyond the next patrol route or supply convoy. This was that chance. Admiral Price finally raised her hand, silencing the debate. We could argue about this for days, but we don't have days. If this transmission is genuine, and I believe it is, then we have a decision to make. She stood, her eyes sweeping across the room. 1,000 years ago, our ancestors made a promise to the species who fought alongside them. They said that if the galaxy ever truly needed us, we would answer the call. For 1,000 years, we have kept to ourselves, building our strength, advancing our technology, and waiting for the day when that promise would be called in. She paused, letting her words sink in. That day has come. The question is not whether we should help. The question is what kind of people we want to be. Are we the descendants of heroes, or are we cowards who hide in the darkness while others suffer? The room was silent. Price looked around, meeting the eyes of every officer present. I know my answer, what's yours? The vote was not even close. By an overwhelming majority, the United Earth Defense Council authorized the deployment of the First Fleet to Prime. Admiral Price would personally lead the expedition, with Coles serving as her second in command. The mobilization took 5 days. Ships that had been in dry dock for years were reactivated and crewed. Weapons systems were tested and calibrated. Supplies were loaded, and crews were briefed on what little they knew about their destination. Spent most of that time on the bridge of the Endurance, overseeing the preparations and trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety in his gut. He had commanded ships in battle before, but never anything on this scale. Never against an enemy that had conquered most of a galaxy. Found him there late one night, staring out at the stars. Can't sleep either, she asked, coming to stand beside him. Shook his head, too much to think about. Do you think we're doing the right thing? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. I think we're doing the only thing, he said finally. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the old days, about the wars our ancestors fought alongside the assembly. He always said that what made humanity special wasn't our technology or our military might. It was our word. He said that when a human makes a promise, they keep it, no matter what. And you believe that? Turned to look at her, his expression serious. I have to believe it, because if it's not true, then what are we fighting for? Nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I believe it too. The next morning, the First Fleet departed from Earth orbit. 400 ships of the line, representing the most advanced military technology humanity had ever produced, formed up in perfect formation and engaged their drives. In a flash of light, they vanished into the void between stars, leaving only a brief ripple in the fabric of spacetime to mark their passage. The journey to Prime took 3 days. Spent most of that time in strategy sessions with Admiral Price and the other senior officers, planning for every possible scenario they might encounter. They had limited intelligence on the Dominion, only what the Assembly's transmission had included, but it was enough to give them a rough idea of what they were facing. Their ships are larger than ours, said during one session, pointing to the holographic display. They favor direct assault tactics, overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower. Their shields are strong, but based on these readings, they're not significantly more advanced than what we have. "What about their weapons?" asked Captain Sandra of the destroyer Relentless. She was a small woman with sharp features and an even sharper mind, known throughout the fleet for her aggressive tactical style. "Plasma-based mostly. High damage potential but slow rate of fire and limited range. If we can get inside their optimal engagement distance, we should have the advantage." Admiral Price nodded thoughtfully. "What about their ground forces?" "Unknown. The transmission didn't include any data on their infantry or armored units. We'll have to improvise if it comes to ground combat." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Price said. "Our priority is the fleet engagement. If we can break their naval superiority, everything else becomes easier." The meeting was interrupted by a call from the bridge. They had arrived at Prime. What they found was not what they expected. Had been prepared for a blockade, perhaps a small enemy patrol guarding the system. What he saw when the Endurance emerged from was a full invasion fleet. At least 50 Dominion warships hung in orbit around Prime, their massive hulls bristling with weapons. On the planet's surface, fires burned across entire continents, visible even from space. "My God," whispered from her station, "we're too late." His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "Negative. We're not too late until that planet is dust. All ships battle stations. Admiral Price, I recommend we engage immediately before they can organize a response." Price's voice came through the comm, calm and controlled. "Agreed. All ships, this is the Admiral, form up for combat. Today humanity returns to the stars. Let's make sure they remember us." The human fleet moved with a precision that would have seemed almost mechanical to outside observers. Ships that had never worked together before fell into formation, as if they had been training for years. Weapons systems powered up, shields activated, and targeting computers locked onto the enemy vessels. The Dominion fleet, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of hundreds of unknown ships, was slow to react. By the time they began organizing a response, the human fleet was already in weapons range. Watched the tactical display, his mind running through calculations at lightning speed. "All ships, concentrate fire on the lead dreadnought. Let's see how tough these guys really are." 400 ships opened fire simultaneously. Missiles, plasma bolts, and kinetic rounds streaked across the void, converging on a single point. The Dominion dreadnought's shields flared bright blue as they absorbed the first volley, then flickered, then failed entirely. The second volley tore through the ship's hull like it was made of paper. The dreadnought exploded in a ball of fire that was visible from the planet's surface. For a moment the battlefield was silent. Then the Dominion fleet began to move, turning to face this new threat with weapons charging, and the human fleet moved to meet them. The battle lasted 6 hours. Had been in combat before, but nothing like this. The scale was beyond anything he had ever experienced, hundreds of ships maneuvering and firing in a deadly dance that stretched across millions of kilometers. The Endurance took multiple hits, her shield straining to hold against the Dominion's plasma weapons, but she gave better than she got. Around him, the bridge crew worked with focused intensity. Coordinated communications between the fleet elements, her voice steady despite the chaos. Chris, the tactical officer, called out targeting solutions with machine-like precision, managed the ship systems, rerouting power to wherever it was needed most. And slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. The Dominion ships were powerful, but they were also predictable. Their tactics relied on overwhelming force, simply throwing enough firepower at a target to destroy it. They had never faced an enemy that could match them technologically, and they did not know how to adapt. The human fleet did. When the Dominion tried to concentrate their fire on individual ships, the humans dispersed, spreading their formation to minimize casualties. When the Dominion charged forward, trying to close the distance, the humans fell back, using their superior speed to maintain optimal range. And when the Dominion tried to retreat, the humans pursued, cutting off escape routes and picking off stragglers. By the end of the 6th hour, the Dominion fleet had been reduced to a handful of damaged ships fleeing into. The rest were debris, scattered across Prime's orbital space like fallen leaves. Slumped back in his command chair, exhaustion washing over him. They had won, but it had not been easy. 37 human ships had been destroyed, another 60 damaged badly enough to require significant repairs. Thousands of sailors had died. But the planet was saved. "Sir," said, her voice hoarse from hours of constant communication, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's Ambassador Al." Straightened in his chair, "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, showing a face that recognized from the historical archives. 4 eyes, copper scales, a massive frame that seemed barely contained by the display. Al's scales were shifting through a rapid series of colors that could not interpret, but his voice was clear enough. "Unknown vessels, this is Ambassador Al of the Galactic Assembly. Please identify yourselves." Smiled despite his exhaustion. "Ambassador, this is Commander Cole of the United Earth Fleet. We received your transmission and came as quickly as we could." There was a long pause. Al's scales settled into a pale gold, a color that's database identified as profound shock. "Earth," the ambassador said slowly. "The humans, you are real." "We're real, Ambassador, and we're here to help." The celebration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. Word spread quickly through the Assembly's remaining communication networks, and within hours, the news had reached every corner of occupied space. The humans had returned. The legends were true. Did not have much time to celebrate. Even as the survivors on Prime organized parties and ceremonies to honor their rescuers, he was meeting with Admiral Price and the other senior officers, planning the next phase of the campaign. "The Dominion will not take this defeat lightly," Price said, studying the tactical display. "They'll regroup, reinforce, and come back in greater numbers. We need to press our advantage while we have it." Nodded, agreed. "But our ships took significant damage in this engagement. We need time to repair and resupply." "Time we don't have. The Assembly's remaining forces are scattered and demoralized. If we don't take the initiative, the Dominion will pick them off one by one." The solution came from an unexpected source. High Counselor Myras, who had been watching the meeting from a corner of the room, stepped forward. "If I may offer a suggestion," she said quietly. "The Assembly may not have the military strength to match the Dominion, but we do have resources. Our industrial capacity is still largely intact. If your ships need repairs, our shipyards can provide them. If you need supplies, our worlds can contribute. We may not be able to fight alongside you, but we can support you." Price considered this for a moment, then nodded. "A fair offer, Counselor, we accept." Over the next few weeks, a remarkable thing happened. The human fleet integrated itself into the Assembly's support network, using alien shipyards to repair their vessels and alien factories to resupply their ammunition. In return, human engineers shared some of their technological advances, helping to upgrade the Assembly's defenses. It was not always smooth. 1,000 years of isolation had created cultural barriers that were not easily overcome. Human officers sometimes clashed with their Assembly counterparts over tactics and strategy. Alien species struggled to understand human customs and idioms. There were misunderstandings, arguments, and more than a few fistfights. But slowly, something began to emerge. Not just an alliance, but a genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and a shared goal. The humans brought military might and technological prowess. The Assembly brought local knowledge and logistical support. Together, they began to plan a counteroffensive. Found himself at the center of this partnership, serving as a bridge between the human fleet and the Assembly's leadership. His grandfather's stories had given him a basic understanding of alien cultures, and he used that knowledge to smooth over conflicts and build relationships. He spent long hours with Al, learning about the Assembly's history and politics. He consulted with Myra's, drawing on her centuries of experience to develop strategies that would work across species boundaries. And he trained alongside alien soldiers, learning their fighting styles and teaching them his own. It was during one of these training sessions that he met Sergeant Tony Vega. Tony was a Marine, a ground combat specialist who had been part of the fleet's security contingent. He was a big man, heavily muscled, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. But despite his intimidating appearance, he had a way with people that found remarkable. First noticed him during a joint training exercise with a group of warriors. They were proud beings, and they had initially resisted the idea of training alongside humans. But Tony had approached them with respect and genuine curiosity, asking about their techniques and offering to share his own. Within an hour, he had them laughing and joking like old friends. "How do you do that?" asked him afterward. Tony shrugged. "Do what, sir?" "Connect with them like that. They have been standoffish with everyone else." Tony thought about it for a moment. "I guess I just remember that we're all people, sir. They might look different, sound different, think different. But underneath all that, we all want the same things, to protect our families, to do right by our friends, to make a difference." He grinned. "Once you figure that out, the rest is easy." Filed that insight away for later use. The counteroffensive began 6 weeks after the Battle of Prime. The combined human assembly fleet, now numbering over 500 ships, launched a series of coordinated strikes against Dominion-held systems. The strategy was simple: hit fast, hit hard, and keep moving before the enemy could respond. Commanded the task force assigned to liberate Station, a massive space station that the Dominion had converted into a military hub. Intelligence indicated that the station held thousands of prisoners from conquered worlds, beings who had been marked for slavery or worse. The approach was tense. Station was heavily defended, with dozens of weapons platforms and a garrison of enemy ships, but had learned from the first battle. He knew how the Dominion thought, how they fought, and how they could be beaten. "All ships execute Maneuver Alpha 7, he ordered. "Draw their fire while the assault team gets into position." The fleet spread out, presenting a diffuse target that the Dominion's weapons had trouble tracking. While the enemy was distracted, a small group of transports slipped through the defenses, carrying Tony and his Marines. "We're in position," Tony reported over the comm, "breaching in 30 seconds. Watched his display, tracking the positions of the transports and the enemy ships. "All ships, concentrate fire on the station's communication array. Cut them off from reinforcements." The battle raged for hours. The Dominion fought with desperate ferocity, knowing that the loss of Station would be a devastating blow to their war effort. But they were fighting on 2 fronts, trying to repel the fleet while also dealing with the Marine assault inside the station. Tony and his team cut through the enemy garrison like a blade through flesh. They moved with precision and purpose, clearing room after room, freeing prisoners and eliminating resistance. By the time they reached the station's command center, the Dominion commander had already fled, leaving behind only a handful of guards who surrendered without a fight. "Station secured," Tony reported. "Prisoners are safe. Well, mostly safe. Some of them tried to fight us at first, thought we were another Dominion trick." Allowed himself a small smile. "Good work, Sergeant. Get those people to the transports. We're pulling out." The liberation of Station was broadcast across the Assembly's communication networks, and the effect was electric. For the first time since the war began, people had something to hope for. The humans were real. They were fighting back, and they were winning. More victories followed. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula, where Captain Sandra sacrificed her ship to save a medical convoy. The Siege of Fortress, where human and assembly forces fought side by side to crack the Dominion's most heavily defended position. The raid on the Dominion shipyards, where a small team of commandos destroyed enough enemy ships to delay the Dominion's counteroffensive by months. Each victory came at a cost. Ships were lost, soldiers died, attended too many memorial services, spoke too many words of comfort to grieving families and friends. The war was taking its toll, and there were moments when he wondered if they could really win. It was during one of these dark moments that Myris found him standing alone on the observation deck of the Endurance, staring out at the stars. "You carry a heavy burden, Commander," she said, coming to stand beside him. Did not turn to look at her. "Too many good people have died. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it." Myris was quiet for a moment. "When the humans left 1,000 years ago, I was heartbroken. I had come to admire your species greatly, and I did not want to see you go. But your commander, Price, told me something that I have never forgotten." "What did she say?" "She said that the measure of a people is not in how they act when things are easy. It is in how they act when things are hard, when the cost is high and the outcome is uncertain and every instinct tells them to give up." Myris turned to face him, her ancient eyes filled with warmth. "You have not given up, Commander. Despite the cost, despite the uncertainty, you are still fighting. That is what makes you worthy of the legends that are told about you." Finally looked at her. "The legends might be a bit exaggerated." Myra smiled. "Perhaps, but every legend starts with a grain of truth, and the truth of humanity, I think, is that you care. About your promises, about your allies, about doing what is right even when it is difficult." She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of profound respect among her people. "That is worth fighting for, Commander. That is worth dying for." Thought about her words for a long time after she left. And when the final battle came, 6 months after the campaign began, he was ready. The Dominion hung in space like a dark jewel, surrounded by rings of orbital defenses and the largest fleet the enemy had ever assembled. Over 1,000 ships, every vessel they had left, gathered for a last desperate stand. The combined human assembly fleet numbered just over 600 ships. They were outnumbered and facing an enemy fighting for their very survival. By any reasonable calculation, they should have lost. They won. It was not a clean victory. The battle lasted for 3 days, a grueling, exhausting struggle that pushed every ship and every soldier to their absolute limits. Barely slept, running on stimulants and sheer determination. Tony led assault after assault on the enemy's orbital platforms, losing half his team in the process. Sandra, commanding a new ship after the loss of the Relentless, performed maneuvers that should have been impossible, turning the tide at critical moments. And throughout it all, the human and assembly forces fought together, not as separate allies but as a single unified force. The barriers that had once divided them fell away, burned away by the crucible of combat. They bled together, died together, and ultimately triumphed together. On the 3rd day, the Dominion fleet was shattered, their orbital defenses destroyed, their exposed. Admiral Price had a choice to make. She could order a bombardment, reducing the planet to rubble and ensuring that the Dominion could never threaten anyone again. Many of her officers argued for exactly that. Price chose differently. "All ships hold fire," she ordered. "Open a channel to the Dominion command." Watched as the communication was established, as the face of the Dominion's supreme commander appeared on the display. The being looked tired, defeated, its dark eyes reflecting the death of an empire. "I am offering you terms of surrender," Price said calmly. "Your military forces will stand down, your conquered territories will be released, your leaders will face justice for their crimes." She paused. "In return, your people will be treated with dignity. No reprisals, no massacres. Humanitarian aid will be provided to those who need it." The Supreme Commander stared at her in disbelief. "You would show us mercy, after everything we have done." Mercy is not about what you deserve, Price said. It is about what kind of people we choose to be. We choose to be better than the darkness. We always have. The Dominion surrendered the next day. The aftermath of the war was almost as challenging as the war itself. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds had been displaced, their homes destroyed, their lives shattered. The Assembly's infrastructure was in ruins. The Dominion's former subjects needed help to rebuild their societies. And through it all, humanity stood at the center, not as conquerors but as partners. Human engineers helped rebuild destroyed cities. Human doctors treated the sick and wounded. Human teachers shared knowledge that had been developed over 1,000 years of isolation. Found himself appointed as Earth's permanent ambassador to the reformed Galactic Coalition, the new alliance that rose from the ashes of the Assembly. It was not a job he had asked for or particularly wanted, but someone had to do it, and he had the relationships and the reputation to make it work. His first act was to invite Myris to Earth. The Ancient had never seen humanities and wanted her to understand where they came from. They stood together on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Myris was silent for a long time, taking in the beauty of the scene. "It is lovely," she said finally. "I understand now why your people wanted to protect it." Nodded. "We almost destroyed it, multiple times. Wars, pollution, climate change. We came close to wiping ourselves out more than once." "But you didn't." "No, we didn't. Every time we came to the brink, something pulled us back. Some spark of hope, some refusal to give up." He smiled. "My grandfather used to say that humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our military might. It's our stubbornness. We're too stupid to know when we're beaten." Myris laughed, a musical sound that had come to appreciate. "I think your grandfather was a wise man." "He was. He also told me something that I've been thinking about a lot lately." "What was that?" Turned to face her, his expression serious. "He said that the stars are full of wonders, but the greatest wonder of all is the connection between thinking beings. The friendships, the alliances, the bonds that form when people choose to care about each other." He gestured at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "We spent 1,000 years alone out there, building our strength, advancing our technology. But we never forgot that we had friends waiting for us. We never forgot our promise." Myris nodded slowly. "And now the promise has been kept." "This promise, yes, but there will be others. There will always be others," smiled. "That's the thing about being part of a community. It never ends. You just keep showing up, keep helping, keep caring." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also the most rewarding thing in the universe." They stood in silence for a while longer, watching the stars emerge one by one. The same stars that humanity had once sailed among, that they had left behind for 1,000 years, and that they had finally returned to. The galaxy had considered humanity a forgotten legend, a story told to children, a myth from ancient times. Now they knew better. Now they knew that legends sometimes come back. And when they do, they bring hope with them. The war was over, but the story was just beginning. Across the galaxy, beings of every species looked up at the stars and saw something they had not seen in a long time. They saw a future worth fighting for. They saw allies worth trusting. They saw proof that even in the darkest times, good people could make a difference. And somewhere, in the great archives of 100 worlds, new stories were being written. Stories about strange beings called humans who had kept a promise made 1,000 years ago. Stories about battles won and sacrifices made. Stories about friendship and courage and the bonds that connect all thinking beings. Stories that would be told for 1,000 years more. Because that is what legends do. They endure.